Grades over curiosity. Most parents don't realize they're doing it, but every time they ask, "What did you get?" before they ask, "What did you learn?" they're quietly teaching their kid that the score matters more than the experience. Over time, children stop exploring subjects because they find them fascinating and start chasing the metric instead. They become very good at optimizing for approval. That skill follows them straight into adulthood, where they optimize for performance reviews, titles, and salaries without ever stopping to ask whether any of it actually means something to them. And the timing couldn't be worse. Optimizing for metrics, performing for approval, producing the expected output on demand, that's exactly what AI does. Faster, cheaper, and without needing a gold star. The one thing it cannot replicate is genuine curiosity. The kid who chases scores their whole life arrives at adulthood having traded away their only real edge, one report card at a time. The backup plan reflex. A kid says they want to be an artist, a writer, a philosopher, a musician, and the parent says, gently or not so gently, "That's nice, but what's your backup plan?" The message underneath that question is your actual interests are a liability. Safety is the goal. And safety, as it's been defined to them, looks like a stable job with a predictable income inside someone else's system. They learn to distrust their own instincts and to treat security as the highest possible value. Here's the problem with that. We are living in a moment where creativity, original thinking, and the ability to connect ideas across disciplines are becoming rarer and more valuable by the year. The polymaths, the makers, the people who never stopped following the thread of genuine curiosity, they're not the risk anymore. The predictable income is. Because the structured, repeatable, safe career path is exactly what AI is learning to do faster and cheaper than any human ever could. So the kid who got talked out of their creative instincts doesn't just end up hollow, they end up in the waiting room of an industry that's being automated out from under them. The comparison engine. Some parents use comparison because it works in the short term. It lights a fire. Look how well your cousin is doing. Why can't you be more like your sister? But the fire it lights is anxiety, not drive. A kid raised on comparison doesn't develop an internal compass. They develop an external one, permanently pointed at whoever they're supposed to be measuring themselves against. That's the rat race in its most literal form, running not toward anything you actually want, but away from the fear of falling behind. The packed schedule. It comes from a good place. Parents want their kids to have every advantage. So there's soccer practice, tutoring, music lessons, coding camp. The problem is that a child who never has unstructured time never learns to direct their own attention. They grow up waiting to be told what to do next. Someone who's very comfortable being handed a schedule and following it. That's not a side effect of how they were raised. That's the product. The rescue reflex. The moment a child is bored, a parent fixes it. The moment they're frustrated, a parent steps in. The moment they fail, a parent cushions the landing. None of that comes from malice, it comes from love. But the lesson being absorbed isn't "my parents care about me," it's "negative feelings are emergencies that someone else should resolve." That belief quietly follows a kid into adulthood, where they avoid hard things not because they're lazy, but because discomfort was never allowed to just exist long enough to become manageable. Hard careers, hard conversations, hard growth, all of it gets sidestepped, and the rat race rewards that perfectly because it only asks you to do what's familiar and bearable indefinitely. Obedience as virtue. Obedience and ethics are not the same thing, but in a lot of households, they're treated as if they are. The good kid is the compliant kid, the one who doesn't argue, doesn't question, does what they're told. That trains a child to outsource their moral and intellectual judgment to authority, whoever's in charge, which is a disposition that makes someone very easy to manage as an adult employee and very difficult to wake up once they realize they've been building someone else's dream for 30 years. Busyness as a badge. When a parent constantly signals through their words, their exhaustion, their pride, that being busy means important, the child absorbs that equation early. Idle time starts to feel like a moral failure. Rest starts to feel like something you have to earn. By the time they're adults, they can't sit still without a creeping sense of guilt, so they fill every gap with productivity, not because it's fulfilling, but because stillness feels dangerous. A person who can't rest is a person who will always show up. And a person who will always show up, regardless of whether it's worth it, is exactly who the rat race was built around. Deferred living. So much of what gets communicated to kids, directly or indirectly, is that the point of working is to eventually stop working. Endure now, live later. That framing quietly teaches children to treat the majority of their waking life as something to get through rather than something to actually inhabit. They grow up expecting to be uncomfortable in their careers and patient about it, because the reward is coming eventually. It rarely arrives the way it was promised, and by the time they realize that, they've already spent decades in the waiting room, which is not coincidentally exactly where the system needs them to stay. Money silence. Some parents shield their children from money conversations entirely. It's adult business, not for kids. Others talk about money only in terms of stress and scarcity. Either way, the child receives no usable framework for understanding how money actually works, so they grow up absorbing the dominant cultural story by default. Go to school, get a job, get a paycheck, pay your bills, repeat. The idea that money could be a tool you learn to use rather than a current you just try to stay afloat in, that never really lands. So they enter the economy as participants who can be managed, not as people who understand the game well enough to play it differently. Conditional worth. This one is subtle, and it runs deep. It happens every time a parent is noticeably warmer, more engaged, more proud when the kid does well, and slightly cooler, slightly more disappointed when they don't. Kids are extraordinarily sensitive to this. They pick it up fast, and they spend the rest of their lives trying to earn their way to feeling acceptable. That becomes the engine behind a lot of adult overwork, not ambition, not passion, just a very old, very quiet anxiety about whether they've done enough to deserve to exist comfortably. The rat race doesn't need to force anyone in. It just waits for people who've already been taught they have to earn their place. And in an AI era, that anxiety doesn't get easier, it gets worse. Because the metrics they've been trained to compete on, output, productivity, measurable performance, are exactly the things being automated. A person whose worth is tied to what they can produce now has to justify their value against tools that never tire, never doubt themselves, and scale infinitely. The rat race doesn't just wait for these people. It's the only place left that still tells them they matter as long as they keep running. Hobbies as rewards. The structure itself sends the message. First homework, then chores, then maybe, if there's time, the thing you actually love. Children learn to treat their genuine interests as a low-priority indulgence rather than something worth organizing a life around. So they grow up with passions they visit on weekends, not lives they've designed around what matters to them. The hobby stays a hobby, the job stays the job, and the distance between who they are and how they spend their time just quietly becomes the architecture of their existence. The rat race rarely has to demand anything. It just has to wait for people who've already been taught to put themselves last. Here's the quiet irony in all of it. The things they were taught to treat as indulgences, the creative work, the personal projects, the ideas they actually cared about, those are the things least likely to be automated. They were handed a hierarchy with compliance and productivity at the top and their most durable human advantage sitting dead last. The quiet surrender. Kids are not listening as much as they're watching. When a parent complains about their job every evening but goes back every morning without question, the child learns something very specific, that this is just how it is, that the gap between what you want and what you do is normal and permanent, and that the appropriate response to that gap is quiet endurance. Not problem solving, not reinvention, just tolerance. That gets filed away as wisdom. It isn't. It's a user manual for how to stay inside a system without ever questioning whether you should.